Hello everyone, good evening. Let's get started, guys. Sharing my screen. I'm going to log into OIC instance. We've started off with file transfer service yesterday, and then we discussed the required context. And we just created the integration. We are supposed to plug in logic into it. And we also discussed the design that we need to plug into a journal input, sorry, the file transfer service, guys. So what are the steps that we're going to plug in? These are the steps that we are supposed to plug into the integration. Let me just close the other tab, guys, to avoid confusion. So these are the steps that we need to plug into the integration. So the first thing that we need to do is, yes, we need to list the files in source SFTP server. Okay, that's step number one, because today you might have 0 files, tomorrow it could be 10 files. So we need to first check how many files we have in SFTP server first, placed by WMS system. And after that, we need to go ahead and loop through them. So, within the loop, we are going to perform three simple steps. Read the file from source. With that content, write the file to the target. And after the file is successfully delivered, we will archive it in the source. Why do we need to do the archival part? Because we don't have to. If we don't archive it, the same file keeps getting delivered to the destination. So everybody is clear on these three steps, right? And we would be using FTP connection 4 times. So we will use source FTP connection 3 times, guys. First, we will use it to list the files. And within the loop, we are going to use it to read the file. And we would use the target FTP connection only once when we do the write file operation. And we will again use a source FTP connection to archive the file. And we've also created the required folder structure in SFTP as well. Let's get connected to it. And we've also placed 3 item CSV files here. So let's do the first step. So we need to list the files in source SFTP server. So we need to go to this particular folder, search for item CSV files here. How do we do it, guys? So we go ahead and use the FTP connection. So looks like we are only seeing target connection. We're not seeing the source connection here. So the reason could be that it might not be in a configured state. So we need to get into this connection and we need to test it. Only when the integration is in configured state, we'll be able to, only when the connection is in configured state, we would be able to use it in the integration. So I can see the source connection now. And when you name an endpoint, this is a naming convention that we follow, guys. So we're going to exactly mention what we're going to do in the form of meaningful words. So if you are reading files from directory, we are going to say read files from directory. And we would use, we would mention everything in small letters for the first word. And from the second word onwards, we would be using init cap, the first letter in caps. So that's a naming convention we follow. So since I want to list the files from SFTP, I'm going to do it this way. So I say list files from SFTP. Continue. And if you look at the operations that are available, there are 6 operations that you can perform using FTP connection. There are 6 operations you can perform using FTP connection. We can read a file, write file, list file, move, delete, and download. So in this integration itself, we'll see how to use the first 4. Delete a file means it just deletes it from the SFTP location. Download file, we'll see how to use this one in the we'll see how to use this one in the FPGA integration. Different integration use case down the line, we'll see how the download works. So we want to do the list files operation first. And when you do the list files, so one thing I can certainly do is I can hard code the directory path and the file name, right? So directory path, I can hard code it. So let me copy this path and mention it there. And I need to mention the file name pattern here. Now, when you mention a file name pattern, remember, can you read this line, guys? So if you mention it as start.txt, what would happen, guys? The list files operation is going to return all the all the text files that you have in the location. So if I say start.txt, all the text files that you have in the location would come back, would come in the response. Do we have any text files here, guys? No, right? It's a CSV file that we have. So if I say star.csv, it's going to give me back how many files, guys? 3 files. Okay. Now, if I'm going to say items here, so what does it mean? It means, yes, the file name should start with item keyword. And after that, anything can come. Start means any number of characters can come. It can be one character, or it can be a date or a timestamp. It can be a sequence. It can be any number. And you have a file extension. If I say one here, if I say items one star.csv, you're going to get only one file, because only, so we need to search for files which starts with items one, right? So depending on the naming pattern that that WMS system is going to use, when it places the files in source directory, we would use that pattern here. And the common questions I get from students here is, Prasad, what if I want to process all the files in this location, regardless of the extension? So we don't have to really care whether it is a text file or a CSV file, we need to process them. So you can do a star.star. And if you say, Prasad, we need to process a CSV files and the text files that are placed in this, we cannot have a comma separated list of values here, guys. We cannot have a comma separated list of values like this. And also, this is probably something that is a fancy doubt that you can probably ask in a training session. But usually when our source system places a file, they're not going to generate files with different extensions, guys. That won't be the case. So it would be either a text file or a CSV file that the source system is going to generate. It is going to be either of them, not both. Okay, so you just have to mention item store.csv. But does anybody see a problem with this approach, guys? Like hard coding a directory path and a file name pattern? What's the problem? Any problem? Anyone foresee any problem here if we do it this way?
I mean, what if the extension got changed?
Yeah. What if the extension changes? What if the file name pattern changes? What if the directory path changes? What do we need to do is client will have to search for either you or me, meaning integration specialist. We need to bring down the service. We need to get into the node and change the hard coding. So it's definitely not a recommended option, right? So, so I'm going to take them out. So I don't want to hard code them. And also I'm going to take this off. I'm going to take it off. So what is it that I'm going to do? Since it is a scheduled orchestration, guys, we can pass up to 5 input parameters. See, when you create an ESS job in Fusion Cloud or a concurrent program, or even if it is a procedure, you can configure input parameters, right? Yes or no, guys? In a similar fashion, on a scheduled orchestration, you can pass input parameters. So we can define up to 5 parameters here. So we're going to define them, and so that what would happen? We don't hard code it. We would define them as parameters, so that whenever the service runs, the user or whoever is scheduling it would be prompted to enter the directory path and a file name pattern, which means whenever we run the service, we can pass in the details. So tomorrow, if these values change, we don't have to change anything in a service. When we run the service itself, we just have to pass in that updated directory path or a file name pattern. But tell me one thing, guys, can I just go to the next screen without entering any value here?
No.
It doesn't let me, right? Because it's a mandatory fields. So I just to work around that error, just to take out that error, I just say A and B. But do we have a directory called A, guys, in the FTP? We don't have it, right? So I've just put in dummy values here. And you can mention what are the maximum number of files that you want to be listed. 100 is a limit that we have. 100 is a default one. And you can also mention a age as well here. Now, where exactly this would be handy, guys? This would come handy. So, for example, sometimes what might happen is a WMS system might start writing a file to this location. Okay, so it has created a file and it has opened it up and it is writing the content. So, but if the integration runs at the same time, it could see that there is a file and it picks up that file immediately and it starts transferring it. But remember, WMS is still writing the content to that file. So just to avoid that scenario, say for example, if WMS system usually takes 2 minutes or 3 minutes to write a file, you can probably say 120 seconds here. So that what would happen? After the file is placed, it would not be listed immediately. Only after 2 minutes, the file would start getting listed when you do the list files operation. So you can make use of this to avoid file from getting picked up, even while WMS system is still writing files, the content into the same file. Okay, so I'm going to keep it as 0. And list files recursively means if you have a subfolder here, so if I create another subfolder here, and in that subfolder, if I place in another file, in that subfolder, if I place in another file, now if you go to the input location, you see if I what would happen if I leave this state? If I leave this state, how many files am I going to get in the response? So this operation is going to search for the files, item CSV files here. And since list files recursively is staked, it would also go into the subfolders. And even within the subfolders, whatever files match the name pattern, they will also be listed down. They will also be listed down. So if you don't want to go to the subdirectories when the files are listed down, you can uncheck it. It would be ticked by default. And we can just click on continue. I'm just saying A and B, and I'm asking OIC to list the files. Click on finish. Now I need to get into schedule, and here I need to define the parameters. Now I would define input directory path here. And I'm going to pass this as an input directory path. Remember guys, I'm just defining the parameters here and I'm assigning a default value. So don't think that I'm hard coding a value again for the directory, the parameter guys. This is just a default value that I'm assigning. So which means whenever somebody tries to run the service, they would be able to see these parameters with the default values, but they can anytime change the value that they're saying there. Okay, at any point in time, they can change the value. This is just a default value that I'm entering there. So in a file name pattern, what is it that we're going to do? We would say items star.csv. And let me also add 2 more directories, guys, because remember, I want to, after I read the file from source, I want to write it to a target, right? After I read the file from source, let me delete this. After I read the file from input, I want to write the file to output. And after the file is read from input and written to the output, we also want to move the file from input to archive. We want to archive it. So let me also create 2 more directory paths, sorry, the parameters with these paths. So I'm going to say output directory. Archive directory as well. Okay, save this. So I've defined 4 schedule parameters. And I would get into this mapper. And the way it works is, remember guys, especially with FTP adapter, it works this way. Normally, when we use FTP connection to do some operation, whether it is a list files or read file or write file, when you do that particular operation in the endpoint, this is what we call as an endpoint. In the endpoint, you mention values. So here I mentioned the directory path as A, file name pattern as B. If I don't do any mappings here, if I don't map any values here, then what would happen is when the files are listed, it is going to search for files with name B in directory A. But remember, those two are dummy values here, guys. Those two are dummy values here, right? So what is it that we're going to do? So if you map any values in the map of here, the values that you map here are going to override what you see here. Okay. So if you don't map anything, A and B will be used. And if I map the values, the mapped values would be used. File name pattern and the input directory path. So I'm asking OIC to go to the input location, search for files whose name starts with item start.csv. Now what this is going to do, guys? So here we are sending out a request to SFTP server. And when we send out a request to SFTP server here, you get back a response. And in that response, you have a collection of files. So I want to loop through that collection of files using a for each loop. Okay. Now I'm going to call it as transfer each file. Remember, guys, we're not going to process the file. We're going to transfer the files. And we are sending out a request here and we get back a response. And in the response, what is it that you see, guys? If you look at the response, remember, we are sending out a request here to list the files. We are getting a response here. And in the response, first you see an item count here. So the number of files would be present in this field. Okay, so this would be 0 if there are no files. It would be 3 in this particular case because we have 3 files which match the name pattern. It's going to be 3. And this file element that you see here, this file tag, it's going to be repeated 3 times. So in the first occurrence of file, you have file name as items1.csv, you have directory path, you have size, and the same file tag would be repeated one more time. In the second occurrence of a file, you have items2.csv properties. So remember, this is a collection of, this is a repeating element that we have. Okay, so this file will be repeated as many times depending on the number of files that we have. So we need to map that repeating element here. And when we are within the loop, what is it that we want to do, guys? The first step that we want to do is we want to read that particular file, right? So first of all, the loop will be iterated 3 times because we have 3 files. And within the loop, what we want to do, in the first iteration, whatever file is being picked up in that iteration, we need to read that file. So I need to have a way to access that file properties here, whichever file is being processed in the iteration. How do I access that file properties, guys? Using a current element name. So I'm going to call it as current file here. I'm going to call it as current file. And when you say current file, what would happen? So whatever current element name you enter here will start showing up in the map of here. Whatever current element name you mentioned here will start showing up in the mapper, and I can make use of that element to access the current file properties within the iteration or within the for each loop. And usually the files would be processed in sequence. If you want to do a parallel processing, you can tick this. If you don't tick it, the files would be processed in sequence. Now, what exactly do we need to do within the loop? Within the loop, there are 3 simple steps we need to do. We need to read the file, write it, and archive it. So to read the file, we need to make use of the source FTP connection. And I say read file from SFTP. I need to do a write file operation. And the transfer mode, you can leave it as binary, whichever is the default one. Whichever mode gets defaulted, you just leave it that way, guys. We normally don't change the mode. So if we have within a file, if we have some special characters like Chinese or any other characters, then we probably select ASCII. In all other cases, we leave it as binary. And we need to mention which file you want to read from what directory. But can we hard code it here again? No, right? I cannot mention 1 or 2 or 3 here because it keeps changing with every iteration. So I just want to leave it blank. So I'm just saying I want to read a file. And also I'm not going to upload any sample file here, guys. Sometimes when you do the FTP operations and stage file operations, we have an option to upload a sample file. We will cover this in detail. We'll cover this in detail in the FPDA integration. Like how does uploading a sample files help? So I'm just saying no for a sample file. And all I'm trying to do is I'm trying to read a file from a source FTP location. But did I mention a directory path, guys, or a file name? They are blank here. So what is my requirement, guys? My requirement is whenever, first of all, when you run this integration, how many times the loop will be iterated now? Since there are 3 files, the loop will be iterated 3 times. And I want to know, so whatever file is being processed in that particular iteration, I want to read that particular file here. So I get it to the mapper. And how do you access the current file properties, guys? So you see a current file element here. Where did this come from, guys? Current file?
So each loop property.
Yeah, in the for each loop, we mentioned this current file here. You see, whatever name that you're going to mention here, that element is going to show up in the mapper. And that element is going to help you access the current file properties. Okay, because remember, within a loop, you would definitely want to understand what file is getting processed in that iteration. So where is it coming from? Within the for each loop, you define a current file element. And this element, whatever you're mentioning here, would be showing up in the mapper. You can give any name, but to give it a meaningful name, I said current file. So I can make use of this element to mention which file to pick up. So it's going to be input location. And the file name can be anything, guys. It can be 1, or it can be 2, or it can be 3. We really don't know. In the first iteration, it can be 1, second iteration can be 2, or third iteration, it can be 3. So I'm mapping the values here. So I'm asking OIC to go to input, location, pick up items 1 or 2 or 3, whatever is being processed in that iteration, pick it up or read that content. Now, whenever you read a file, you're going to, again, we are sending out a request here to read the file. You get back a response. In that response, you have the entire file content. Now I need to make use of the target FTP connection. This is the only time we are going to use target, guys. We're going to use source connection 3 times in the integration. First to list the files, then to read the file, and we're going to use it later on as well to archive the file. Target FTP connection would be used only once when we write the file to target location. So I would say write file to SFTP. And you do a write file operation. And you mention to which directory path you want to write the file and the file name pattern. We can hard code the directory path and the file name pattern here, guys. But I'll just say A and B here again, because I want to handle it in the mapper. But when we do the write file operation, what is it that we wanted to do, guys? We wanted to do the PGP encryption. Yes or no, guys?
Yes.
Yes.
So I'm going to say in PGP encryption, I would say perform PGP encryption. Now, when we use the connection within the integration, and when we do a write file operation, we say encryption. And when we say download file, if it is an encrypted file, we say decryption. Okay, so I'm going to say perform PGP encryption on the file to be sent to external SFTP server. But to encrypt a file, what is it that we need, guys? To encrypt a file?
Public key.
Public key. Where OIC is going to get that public key from?
That we have added the connection.
In the connection, we added that public key. So it goes to the target FTP connection. And in the target FTP connection, we have uploaded the public key. So it's going to pick up this public key and use it to encrypt the file. So I say continue. And I'm not going to upload any sample CSV file here. I'll just say no. So I'm just saying I want to write a file. I didn't mention what should be the file name or where should the file be placed. And I also didn't mention the file name as well. We also need to map the content. There are 3 things that we need to take care of, guys. What are those three things? First of all, where the file should be placed. Where should the file be placed, guys? The file should be placed in output directory, right? And we have a schedule parameter defined for it. Now, what should be the file name? Since I'm going to place the encrypted file in the output location, I don't want to place the file with a name as items1.csv. So whatever file is being processed, right? So that file name we have here. So can I put an encrypted file in the output location with just a file extension as CSV, guys? If I do it that way, the other third party might get confused. If they see the file as items1.csv, it might assume that it is an unencrypted file, right? So to make it obvious to the third party that it is an encrypted file, so to the file name, we can add a .pgp extension so that it would be obvious to the third party system that it is an encrypted file. And how do I add a .pgp to the file name, guys?
It's calculate.
Yeah, I'll just say concat.pgp. And what is the most important thing that is still missing, guys? So we mentioned, okay, I missed the closing brackets. What's another? So we mentioned where the file should be placed, what should be the file name, but we need to map the file content. So when we read the file, before this write file operation, we were reading the file, right? We were sending out a request to read the file, and we've got back a response. And in the response, what do you see? You would be able to see an ICS file, and under ICS file, you see the file reference. So this file reference is nothing but the entire content of the file, guys. So I can just map this entire file content and map it to the write file operation. So I'm just trying to write a file with the entire content that is read from the source SFTP server. So this single mapping that you're doing here is mapping the entire file content from a source to the target. Okay, sometimes we might have to transform the file content, right? Maybe change XML to CSV or XML to JSON, etc. That is still possible, but we'll worry more about it when we do the FPGA integration, like changing the file formats, etc. But here, when we are reading the file, remember we didn't upload any sample file, meaning we are reading the file as a unit, as a whole, and that file content would be there in a file reference. And I'm just passing that entire file content as a single unit here. Now we go ahead and save it. Okay, let's get it over. All mappings are saved. So we are, it's a scheduled orchestration. We are listing down the files, looping through it. We're reading the file from SFTP. With that content, we are writing the file to SFTP. What is the last step that we need to do, guys?
Archive the
Files.
Right, so archive file in SFTP. Now, which operation do I need to select? Move file operation. And when I say I want to move a file, it asks me, Prasad, which file do I need to pick up from what directory? Where should the file be placed? And what is the directory file? So I'm going to handle all of that in the mapper. I'm going to leave it blank here. And I'll also pick this box called overwrite file, so that what would happen if this file already exists in this location, it would be overwritten. So I'm just saying move a file. I'm just saying move a file. Input directory. File should be placed in output. Now, where should the file be picked up from? Which file needs to be picked up? Whatever file is processed, it needs to be picked up. And we can place the file directly in a, we can place the file in target directory, meaning archive. We can place the file, sorry guys, this is not the right mapping. We need to archive the file, right? So we need to use archive directory. So we need to put the file into archive, not to the outputs. And we also need to, and when we place the file, we can place the file in the archive directory with the same name as well. But if you want, what you can also do is, you also have an option to concatenate date and the timestamp, guys, if you want. If you want to concatenate a date and a timestamp, you can do that as well. So what is it that you can do? You can say, for example, you can use first file name underscore. So you can say underscore, and you can also, there is an option to format a date as well if you want. Okay, so you can say format a date and a time. And this is a function that is going to take current date as input. So you can just take current date. And you can also mention the format string that you want to add here. So say, for example, if you want to add a format string like this one. Okay, let me just get the string, guys. There is a specific format in which you mention it. We're going to talk more about this when we do the outbound flow as well. We can just mention it this way. Okay, so I'm just formatting a current date into this particular format, MMDDYY, and it is a hyphen that we are adding in the file name. I'm not really sure hyphen is allowed. Or let's keep it simple, guys. It's not complicated. Otherwise, what I do was I'll just add in the current date itself. You can also do the formatting if you want, but I'll just say current date, and I would say dot CSV. Okay, I'm going to say just a current date or dot CSV, file name underscore date dot CSV. Remember concat statement, guys, function. Even though it looks like it can take in only 2 inputs, it can take any number of inputs, guys. URL interlocks. Save it. Now we need to go ahead and test the integration. Now to test the integration, what do we need, guys? First of all, we need to enable tracking identifiers. So I'm going to say file name pattern as input. Other tracking identifier input directory. And I would use start time as a third tracking identifiers. Now the status has changed to configured now. Status changed to configured. Now we can go ahead and activate a integration. So let's go ahead and activate the integration now, guys, first. And we would do an ad hoc run or test the service first, and then we would define a schedule afterwards. So I'm just activating the integration first, and I'm going to set the tracing level to debug. You see that the integration is active now. And after you build a scheduled orchestration, guys, we have an option to add a schedule or define a schedule for it. We'll come to that in a moment. But we can also do an ad hoc run of it. We can do an ad hoc run of it. Okay. Now, when we want to run the integration, remember I'm doing an ad hoc request here. I'm not going to define. I've not scheduled it yet. I'm just testing my integration to see if it works as expected or not. So if I scroll down, how many parameters do we see here, guys? What are the parameters that we defined on the service? 4 parameters we defined, right? Input, output, archive, file name. And these are the default values that you see. As long as these default values hold good, guys, we can just go ahead and run the integration. But tomorrow, if the directory path or an extension or the file name changes, you just have to go into current value and overwrite it. So tomorrow, if for WMS system says, I'm going to place in the files as not as CSV, but as TXT, you just have to mention it this way so that what would happen after that particular run is done, this value is going to overwrite this. So that from that moment onwards, whenever integration runs, it would search for a text files, not the CSV files. So we have basically parameterized the required inputs. So whenever we run the service, we have an option to pass in the values now. Can I go ahead and run it now, guys? Let's see what would happen if we run it. You see that there is an instance ID generated. Let's get into it. You could see that the integration is running. It's in progress at the moment. It is still in progress. And you could see that integration is completed here. And let's validate the end result first, guys. So if we go into SFTP, first of all, in the input folder, if I refresh it, would I be able to see any files, guys?
Should not be there.
It should not be there. And if I go to output, should the files have already been written there?
Yes.
Yes, the
Yes,
files
it
are
is.
written. And is it going to be a normal file or an encrypted file?
Encrypted.
It's going to be the PGP encrypted file. And if I go to archive, should the file have been moved to archive, guys, after it is written to the... And what's the file name that you see here? It is actual file name underscore date and a timestamp .csv. So you can change this, guys, whatever you want to do here. So from the file name, you can replace or delete .csv, and you can basically name the file the way you want it. Okay, I was just trying to show you the possibilities there. Now tell me one thing, guys, think about it and answer. So, and one important point is when you see the integration trace here, so you see, you will be able to see the complete trace here, guys. First, the files have been listed down. And when the files are listed down, we got back a response, right? So when you list the files, you get back a response. And what's the response that you see? In the response, we see that the item count is 3. How many files are there, guys? 3 files. And how many times this file element is repeated? 3 times.
3 times.
And since this file element is repeated 3 times, how many times the for each loop would be executed? 3 iterations. And you could see those 3 iterations here. So this is the first iteration. This is the first iteration, and I go to the next screen. I click on this one. This is a second iteration, and this is a third iteration. This is a third iteration. So all the 3 files have been successfully read from source, read from the input, written to the target, and they were also archived as well. They were also archived. And another important point is even within every node, guys, within every node, even you see 3 iterations here. And for every iteration, again, you have all the detailed statistics. Okay, so you see this is iteration 2. At each and every step, you have a detailed payload captured. At each and every step, you have a payload captured. Say, for example, when you're doing a write file operation, if you want to see, or when you're doing a archive file, what is the message that you actually pass as input to that node? You will be able to see it here. So this is a payload that is passed as input to the archive file node. Say, for example, if file archival fails, so if file archival fails, what is the first thing that I need to do? I'm going to look at the input payload that is passed, or the payload that is passed as input to that error node. And the moment I look at this one, I can easily figure out what is the mistake that I have done. Remember, guys, when you build integrations, respective value practice, 99% of the mistakes you do would be the mapping errors. Okay, so you might miss one mapping or the other, and you might miss the wrong fields, you might map the wrong fields, etc. So how do you debug your own issues? You don't need Prasad to do it. I'll tell you in the next 5 minutes how you can debug your own issues with the help of this, with the help of this tracing level as debug. And before I talk about debug, tell me one thing, guys. If I run this integration now, if I run this integration again, if I run this integration again, we don't have any item CSV files in the input location. Do we have any files, guys, in the input?
No.
And if I run the integration, what would happen, guys? Would it error out? Yes or no?
Yes.
Error out.
Anybody says it doesn't error out?
It will not error out.
Why? Why do you think it will not error out?
It will just check the files and.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
So since we are trying to list down the files, first, what is it that we are trying to do, guys? We're not directly reading a file here. We're not assuming that WMS system has placed the file. So if you probably have a read file operation here, it would definitely error out because you're trying to read a file that doesn't exist. But what is it that we are trying to do? We have built this integration in a foolproof manner. We are basically listing down the files first to see, first of all, is there any file to process or not, or transfer or not? Do we have any files here? No, right? Zero. So say it doesn't even enter the loop, but integration still completes in succeeded state. Okay, slightly confusing, but this is how the behavior would be, right? If you don't have any files, nothing to worry, integration would still error out. Now, at least one of you might ask me this question, right? Prasad, when there are no files, that means there might have somebody might have forgotten to run the process at a WMS end, because usually we would have at least few files in here. So we need to raise a flag to the WMS admin saying that please check if WMS is generating a files or not. So when there are no files, we need to send a notification. Can we do that, guys?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. How do we do it? We would we need to make use of a switch statement. So there are two nodes, two elements that you need, two actions you need. You need basically a switch statement, and in that switch statement, what you're going to do is you are going to check the response of the rest of the list files operation. Okay, so I'm going to add a switch statement here, and in the first condition, I'm going to check what is the item count. So I would have to add a switch statement here, and I check if the count is greater than 0. And if the count is greater than 0, I'm going to execute this for each loop. So before this for each loop, I would add a switch statement, and if count is greater than 0, I run this logic. And if it is equal to 0, otherwise, here in this branch, I can plug in an email notification. How do you use a switch statement? How do you send out an email notification? We'll check it out in the next integration. But remember, if we have to raise an alarm, or if you want to flag someone, you can do so. Okay. Now, when you build this integration, let's say after the session, at least I'm expecting or hoping that at least few of you would build it. And when you build the integration, what would happen, guys? So certainly, since this is a complex one, and we're doing quite a few mappings at each and every node, you might miss one mapping or the other. Okay. So let's say Vishal is building this integration. Okay, let me just go ahead and clone it. Or any one of you. I'm just taking a name as an example. Let's say Vishal is building this integration. Okay, I'm just cloning it. And Vishal has done all the mappings. He has built the integration. He has done all the mappings absolutely right. He has got all of them right. It's just that he missed one of the mapping in the last node. Okay, so let's say Vishal has done everything perfect, and in a hurry to test his first complex integration, let's say he has missed one of the mapping. So let's say he missed this mapping in particular. Okay, quite possible, yes or no, guys? Because you had to do so many mappings, right? So it's obvious that you might miss one mapping or the other. Now, what would happen? So yes, he has built the integration, and Vishal assumes that everything is in place, and he goes ahead and tests the integration. Right, let's go ahead and activate it. And let me also place a couple of data files here. And I'm going to, Vishal is going to test his integration. What is he going to do? He's going to run it. And when he runs it, yes, we have 3 files now. Now, when he runs the integration, what would happen is, there seems to be a bug, guys. When we click on that instance, right? So when the details get loaded here, let me wait for 1 minute here. You would still see that the wheel just keeps spinning. Would be a bug for Oracle to fix in the next release. And no matter how long you wait here, so it would just be this screen that you get to see. So you can just refresh it. And that would load the details, guys. So if you see here, first of all, the integration errored out. Yes or no, guys? Integration errored out. And Vishal would look at the integration here. So you can see that the files are listed down. And the loop is iterated once. How many files were there, guys? First of all, when the files were listed down?
3.
3 files, right? So let's see if that is what we have got in the response here. So we've got 3 files, that's fine. So meaning this worked as expected. And the first file is picked up. It has been read from source, written to the target. And when the file is archived, what has happened, guys? This particular node has errored out. Now, when you build a complex integration and when your integration errors out, first thing that I want you to do is I want you to put in at least 5 to 10 minutes of effort to try to debug your issues on your own, guys. If you are not able to figure out where you're going wrong, I would be more than happy to help. But I want you guys to put in at least 10 minutes of sincere effort to try to resolve your own issue, because that's the only time you will learn. Let's see. Sometimes what students do is the moment an integration errors out, they take a snap of this. They take a snap of this and send it in WhatsApp. Sir, can you have a look? Yes, dear, I'll definitely have a look. But before I take a look, I'm going to ask you 10 questions. And I'll not ask all of them at one go. I'll ask them one after the other. You would get so irritated that you would debug it yourself. Okay, the reason why I do it is because I want you to try out and learn all those debugging techniques. Okay, so if you don't put in any effort and if you just say my integration is erroring out, I would say thank you, please have a look again. Okay, so what is it? What are the 3 things that you need to do? First of all, you see the green color would stop at one particular node. What does it indicate? That means there is some issue here. Yes or no? Yes. What is the first thing that you need to do? Click on the drop down here and you need to click on view error. Okay, and this is going to tell you what the problem is. When I say view error, it just opened this up and it is showing me this error message. It is showing me this error message. Okay, click on the payload here and that's going to show me the error message. What does it say, guys? The error? What does it say?
File not found.
FTP move file not found. Okay, so if you're smart enough, you can work out what the problem is. So whatever file that you're asking it to move, it's not able to find it, unfortunately. And you have the details here. And what does it say? There's file, and you see a file name here. You see a file name here. And it is saying not found in location. Ooh. Okay, let me just copy this. Can anybody spot a mistake in the file name, guys, here? So you see the directory path, input. What's the file name that you see here, guys?
It's null.
It is saying null, right? So looks like it is trying to find a file with name null. What does it mean, guys? It means that basically you might have, it means that you might have missed to map the file name. So for now, by looking at this error message, I still don't know what's the exact reason, but what I get to see is somehow the file name was not getting passed accurately here. So whichever file needs to be picked up or archived, that file name is not correctly. So what I can do is I can immediately come back into the integration and I can get into the mapper because this is where I have mapped the payload, right? So I can get into the mapper. Even before the mapper, what I can do, even before the mapper, this is, so look at the error, that is the first important step. And the second important step is you get into the activity stream and what you need to do is you need to see this particular node error out, guys. You need to see what is the payload that is passed as input to that node. What is the payload that is passed as input to this node, right? So you see data mapping completed, or you open this node itself, you will be able to see the message received by invoke operation. So this is a payload that has been received as input, not into the integration, guys, into the error node. Okay, when you send me an error, I'm going to ask you, what is the payload message? What is the message that has been sent as input to the error node? My intention is this message, not the parameters that you pass as input to it. Now, when you click on this, what do you see, guys? You see this message. Does anybody see a problem there? So if you see this message, Anybody see a problem there? First of all, you see four
File name is
attributes there.
blank.
Yeah. So you see source directory, target file name. So I'm saying what file I've mentioned the path from where the file needs to be picked up. And I also mentioned the path where the file should be placed. And I also mentioned what should be the file name in the target. What else do I need to mention, guys?
Yeah, file name is blank.
File name is missing. So this would tell me clearly that I probably missed the mapping, right? So I would go into the mapper now, and in the mapper, I would be able to see, I click on the view mapper. And when I look at the mappings, I get to see that the file name mapping is missed. So this is precisely why this particular node has error. Okay. So whenever you get issues, guys, try to look at the error message, look at the payload passed as input to that error node, look at the mappings. And also, if the mapping error is also not obvious, try to open the integration that we created in the session in a different browser, guys, and compare my mappings with your integration mappings. 99.99 cases, you would be able to easily understand or spot what is the mistake that we said. Okay. Now, if you see here, so there might be a few more things that might come to your mind. I'm not sure if anybody is thinking about it. Prasad, you see one integration has errored out, but there are two more files in the location. They were not transferred. And even on the first file, you see it is not archived. It is not archived. So the reason why integration stopped midway is we didn't do the fault handling in the integration. So since we didn't do the fault handling, whenever you get an error in the integration, it would stop then and there itself, and it doesn't process the other files as well. It doesn't transfer the other files. So, but there is a lot of stuff that you can do with the help of fault handling in OIC. So we will be talking about fault handling in quite detail in the next integration, guys. And we'll spend almost 2 1-hour sessions talking only about fault handling in the journal import service. And after we do that integration build, you would exactly know how to effectively handle faults in the integration. So for now, if anybody is thinking about how do I make sure that this service process that transfers other files, even if one of them errors out, or how do I effectively handle the errors, please bear with me for a few more sessions until we talk about the fault handling. In short, we'll be adding something called as a scope here, which would be treated as a logical unit. We're going to dump all these nodes into a scope. And at a scope level, we do a fault handling so that even if one of the file fails transfer, the other files would still be processed. More details we'll discuss in journal import service. Any questions from anyone, guys, in what we covered today? Okay. Remember, this is a scheduled orchestration, right, guys? So ideally, so we try to run it manually today to see if the integration works as expected or not. But looks like our integration is working as expected, right? But we haven't defined the schedule yet. We haven't scheduled the service yet. So what we'll do is tomorrow, as a first thing, we will talk about how the scheduling options available in OIC, because I would need around 15 minutes to talk about it. We'll talk about the scheduling options first. So do remind me, guys. If I go into the next integration, do remind me once. I'll talk about the scheduling options first, and then we will talk about the next integration. Okay, please complete this build, guys, and test your integration today. Okay, yeah. Thanks, everyone. See you tomorrow.